that's probably quite enough for me. So I'm going to pass over the microphone, literally, to Mark Roberts, who's going to tell us all about Byron in Tuscany, and then introduce Jan for the second half.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming. This is a very short introduction to the main event this evening, which is the performance by Jan Noble. There we are. Lord Byron, the most flamboyant of the second generation of English Romantic poets, spent 2/3 of his adult life on the continent. No English poet had a higher European reputation, and none exerted so much literary influence. Pushkin in Russia, Leopardi in Italy, Lamartine and Hugo in France were all hugely indebted to him. His earliest travels from 1809 to 1811 took him to Portugal and Spain, and thence by sea to Sardinia, Malta, Albania, and Greece, followed by Smyrna and Constantinople. The result of these exotic experiences was the long narrative poem Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, which had such a success that Byron wrote, "I awoke one morning and found myself famous." His third and final set of travels took him to Missolonghi in Greece, where he used his great wealth to support the Greek War of Independence against the Ottoman Turks, and where he perished of a fever on the 19th of April, 1824. In between, apart from a period in London from 1811 to 1816, Byron was in Italy. In London, he lived a dissipated life and took many lovers, one of whom, Lady Caroline Lamb, wrote that he was mad, bad, and dangerous to know. In Italy, he remained for about 8 years, spending long periods in Venice and Ravenna. Florence, he only visited twice, and very briefly. He stopped here for one day in April 1817 on his way to Rome. To his friend and publisher John Murray, he wrote, "At Florence, I remained but a day, having a hurry from Rome, to which I am thus far advanced. However, I went to the 2 galleries, from which one returns drunk with beauty. What struck me most were the Mistress of Raphael, a portrait, the Mistress of Titian, a portrait, a Venus of Titian in the Medici Gallery, the Venus, Canova's Venus, also in the other gallery. Titian's Mistress is also in the other gallery, that is, the Pitti Palace Gallery. The Parce of Michelangelo, a picture, and the Antinous, the Alexander, and 1 or 2 not very decent groups in marble. The Genius of Death, a sleeping figure, etc., etc." His reference to the Parce, wait a minute, sorry. I have to get rid of that. His reference to the Parce or Fates by Michelangelo puzzled me at first. This rather haunting painting, now ascribed to Francesco Salviati, is in the Palatine Gallery and was indeed once attributed to Michelangelo, for example, in the inventory of the collection of the Grand Prince Ferdinando, drawn up in 1713. Here we see Atropos, she who cannot be turned aside. Cutting the thread of life. while Lachesis draws it out and Cloto holds the distaff. The Genius of Death is a bust by Antonio Canova, sculpted in 1789. Byron continues, I also went to the Medici Chapel, fine frippery in great slabs of various expensive stones, to commemorate 50 rotten and forgotten carcasses. It is unfinished and will remain so. The church of Santa Croce contains much illustrious nothing. The tombs of Machiavelli, Michelangelo, Galileo Galilei, and Alfieri make it the Westminster Abbey of Italy. I did not admire any of these tombs beyond their contents. That of Alfieri is heavy, and all of them seem to me overloaded. What is necessary but a bust and a name, and perhaps a date, the last for the unchronological, of whom I am one? But all your allegory and eulogy is infernal, and worse than the long wigs of English numbskulls upon Roman bodies in the statuary of the reigns of Charles II, William, and Anne. On his second visit, 5 years later, he spent a few days in the company of the poet and banker Samuel Rogers, apparently in the Hotel Schneider, here on the Lungano Guicciardini. At any rate, his name appears on a plaque in the entrance hall, together with those of St. Catherine of Siena, Raphael, Napoleon, and Sir Walter Scott. This was the hotel of which Lady Blessington lamented the perpetual bustle and everlasting odor of soup. Byron was not especially attracted to Florence, and he had no wish to live here. Rather snobbishly, he intensely disliked the English tourists. Florence and Naples are their Margate and Ramsgate, and much the same company too, by all accounts, he wrote to his Irish friend, Thomas More. Late in October 1821, Byron left Ravenna for the Tuscan town of Pisa. He traveled in style with several carriages and wagons. I have a picture of his entourage. With several carriages and wagons and his hangers-on and servants, not to mention his menagerie of animals. His friend Shelley, whom Byron met for the first time in Switzerland, noted that Byron's household included 10 horses, 8 enormous dogs, 3 monkeys, 5 cats, an eagle, a crow, and a falcon. And all of these, except the horses, walk about the house, which now and then resounds with their unarbitrated quarrels, as if they were the masters of it. Shelley believed his list was complete, but then as he departed, he met on the grand staircase 5 peacocks, 2 guinea hens, and an Egyptian crane. Byron remained in Pisa from November 1821 to September 1822, where he completed cantos 6 to 12 of his satirical poem Don Juan. He lived in the Palazzo Lanfredini on the Lungano Mediceo, a magnificent 16th century marble palace, for which he paid 200 zecchini per annum, about £50. It had a walled garden, and Byron wrongly believed that the staircase had been made by Michelangelo. Now known as Palazzo Toscanelli, since 1913, it has housed the State Archives. Byron and his pretty young mistress, Teresa Guiccioli, maintained separate apartments, meeting little during the day and then only by appointment, spending only their evenings together unless they were visiting English, in which case Teresa would keep to her own rooms. Throughout the day, they wrote notes to each other. She respected his privacy, and such was her reverence for his writing that she would never dream of interrupting him at work. Teresa still loved him passionately, though his ardor for her had somewhat cooled. They had settled for quiet domesticity. Certainly, there was no dissipation, such as had characterized his life in London and Venice. As compared with Ravenna, in Pisa, Byron found himself in a rather less Italian and more English environment. The Shelleys, Mary and Percy Bysshe, were already settled in the town, as were their friends the Williamses, the Masons, old Mr. Dolby, and young Mr. Taft. Shelley's cousin Thomas Medwin was there, as well as the eccentric adventurer Edward Trelawney, whom you see at the top right. There was a clergyman called Dr. Knott, whose love of scandal was such that Byron said he had revised the commandment to read, "Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor." Not all of these people were as they seemed. Mr. Williams was not, in fact, married to Mrs. Williams. Mr. Mason was really Mr. Tye, and Mrs. Mason was really Lady Mountcashel. Mary and Percy Bysshe Shelley lived together with Edward and Jane Williams in a palazzo on the opposite side of the river from Byron's. Shelley was in love with Jane. All these people composed what later became known as the Pisan Circle. In Pisa, Byron would get up at noon, have for breakfast a cup of unsweetened green tea and a raw egg yolk. He would read, play billiards, and go for rides along the coast, where he would shoot with his pistols. Contrary to his usual practice, he would give dinner parties, inviting all the local English to his hospitable table. Never, as Shelley said, did he display himself to more advantage than on these occasions, being at once polite and cordial, full of social hilarity, and the most perfect good humor, never diverging into ungraceful merriment, and yet keeping up the spirit of liveliness throughout the evening. Sad news came in April 1822 from the convent of Bagnocavallo, where Byron's illegitimate daughter by Claire Clermont, Allegra, had been staying, being educated by the nuns. The beautiful 5-year-old child had died of typhus. Byron was assailed by feelings of guilt, and rightly so, for he had egregiously neglected Allegra throughout her short life. On the 1st of July, the Cockney essayist, poet, and journalist Leigh Hunt arrived in Pisa with his wife Marianne and their 6 lively children, and Byron impulsively put them all up on the ground floor of his palazzo, though privately regarding the little Hunts as yahoos. With Shelley and Byron, Hunt discussed the founding of a new magazine to be called The Liberal. Hunt had calculated that there were some 200 English families living in Tuscany. On the 8th of July, Shelley, Williams, and their cabin boy Charles Vivian set out in a little boat from Livorno on course for Lerici. In a violent storm, their overmasted craft Don Juan was wrecked, and all 3 members of the inexperienced crew were drowned. 10 days later, Shelley's decomposing body was washed up at Viareggio and was identified by Edward Trelawney from the clothing and from the copy of Keats's Lamia in the jacket pocket, folded back at Isabella or the Pot of Basil. Together with Trelawney, Byron and Hunt attended the cremation of Shelley's body on the beach at Viareggio. After this, Byron lost interest in Hunt's literary plans and withdrew his financial support. After Pisa, Byron spent 6 weeks in Livorno, which the English called Leghorn. He stayed just outside the city in the salmon-pink Villa du Poi at Montenero, accompanied by Teresa and by her brother, the Conte Gamba. Byron was friendly with Teresa's brother, though at the Villa du Poi he did have an argument with him, during which pistols and daggers were drawn. When the 6 weeks were up, he left for Genoa, and it was from there in August 1823 he set out for Greece, where he was to meet his untimely end. On the left, we see Byron's coffin in the vault at Hucknall Torkard in Nottinghamshire, permission for burial in Westminster Abbey having been refused, together with the urn containing his heart, brains, etc. Thank you. I'd like now to introduce the poet Jan Noble, who will present Byron 200, a work in 3 acts that describes 3 occasions when Byron, who was a famous and fabled swimmer, took to the water, told from the perspective of a narrator looking down on the Dardanelles, the site of Byron's legendary swimming of the Hellespont. The action carries us from contemporary settings to historic locations, from the modern English seaside to the coast of Viareggio. Jan.
And we came upon a point, a promontory, looking down toward a course not 1 mile wide, but with such force of water running through the divide, it seemed, was not a single breach that saw one world in 2, but more of 2 worlds, whole, and set against each other, facing off across this bitter channel, a double bluff, both a beginning and an end. And this ledge on which we stood, a stage from which good speech may well be made, yet beyond, a gorge where no kind advice will be returned, a vault where only hope is thrown. My friend and I, contained in silence and divided by it, until he spoke. Not since the dam of Marib broke, and below its twinned gardens, both to the left and to the right, engulfed by spoiled flood and blighted, each with bitter fruit, nor since happy, saw fit to raise the waters at the Nile's bank and send them seaward in a hellish swell, has such division fallen on this earth, such divergence that I witness here, only shows how these blown words are ill-equipped to heal the rupture ridden into this dismal clay, or seal a pact between 2 factions. And looking low into the ravine, one might be drawn toward the thought of jumping off. And here he paused, as if the ledge was set to tempt him from it. But with unsure footing he went on, It was the folly of the gods to throw lame Hephaestus from the mount, to cast him down, to mock his dragging foot, that at his anvil he did forge such swords that, when in mortal hands, they wrought new havoc on these lands, that of such a shocking awe were his hammers cast, a single blow upon a rock would open up the world to new disunion, split east from west. This bank, aside from that, and, dear friend, permit this sighing sea, this inverted sky to fall between you and I. She may stand apart from him as he from her, but all that's fluid in between, the turning tides that soothe the jagged edges of each side, that quick liquid, that slow foam is a poem, undefined and bold, the mystery that is unwritten here. There was one, not quite a god, but of a rank he might compare, and with such abundant flaw, I'd forgive you thinking that he were not of earth contrived, but fashioned in unworldly yards, schooled in such abhorrent courts, his title may surprise you. There was one who entered here, followed myth into the waves to find his hero on the rise, who came with an uneven pace. Yet, with ambition, he could overcome his cruel default, not find a cure. Instead, relief from his sick root that had him stand a withered tree on solid ground. But on this lock, he moved with new articulation, found a grace within each stroke that would propel him to new fame. There was danger in his pursuit to prove a worth, and yes, a madness in it too. They called him bad, but from this vantage, would you judge? At this edge where new calamity is cast, where old misdeeds find harbour, where men have launched such high offence, sent ships into such cruel dispute, met provocation with unequal arms, set declaration for the legal murder of those of an opposing suit. Under such condition, would you call a poet bad? And then a sea mist came upon us, and my friend inhaled and then began to stir the fume that gathered there, as if a cook, attendant to a steaming pot, but more. Consumed, he stood a shaman in the vapor, conjured past and future, raised a vision from the fog, a film that played out in these vague frames. It is, he hissed, with a flicker, and the yellow edges of a once upon a time summer, a reignited sunlight, and the diluted blues of a washed out English seaside appear. It begins, he hissed, right here, with a story cast out upon the water and a child, aged 9, on the beach's hobbled ride. I will describe his life in 3 tides: a launch, a voyage, a going ashore. There is, of course, a whole ocean more, My breath is short, my mortal vapour a whisper to the storm he'll raise. Come close, and I will show you on this broken coast a boy, ill-formed, but born with such appetite, he will recoup the loss, if not repair the flaw of his cracked lot. Not yet in double figures, not yet a lord, but on sands as uncertain as our own, a beach familiar to a present eye, find wee Georgie B, rosy-cheeked, spoiled with an ice cream, holding his cone to the tub of his trunks, cocksure, provocative, trying to get a rise from his ma, a young punk, spitting at the sea, goading it, provoking it, calling it names. Hey, you slimy half-rhyme for the sky. Hey, you sloppy copy of the endless heavens, you big wet going nowhere poem, verse after verse, wave after wave, all mouth, no plot. His mother looks up. Oh, Georgie, if patter was water, you'd droon. Yes, that's Katie, jaunty with a gin, adjusting her cosy on the sharp shingle, her generous breasts like two jostling jellyfish. George looks away, awkward, appalled, scans the horizon for distraction, not yet adventure. A taunt comes back across the water, a schoolboy's chorus soar to his ears. Where's your daddy gone? Where's your daddy gone? Over the sea, calls George, and he could go cut his throat there for all I care. But no one can hear his world in a seashell, this silent movie, this limping animation with a rattle of sprockets. The film ticks on. Watch George curling his foot into the sand, attempting to bury his deformity, trying to hide his shame on the shore. George sinking his pin into the wet clay, covering up his disgust with himself, with this twisted life, this broken gift given at birth, his curse, his dirty secret, his lame excuse, his limp existence, his uneven reason to be sad. 1 foot good, 1 foot bad. George watches a crab pick through the kelp, studies its scuttle, its inarticulate limbs scratching the pedals, its graceless sideways shuffle, its rosy beetle-backed body polished by the sighing waves as it makes its sly escape from the mute and tuneless land. King of the crabs, I am, George spits. But there is a sudden song on his lips. A sneer slips into a smile. A crab king am I. And with his foot uprooted, his best leg thrown into gear, he drags the other with new value, finds his stride, a near strut toward the water's edge. King of crabs, and all the crawling beasts they call me, I'll be your creeping fiend, your inelegant devil below the knees, your faltering bully boy, your Yahoo! I'll be your stumbling, ugly, cloven-hoofed brute if you'll let me. And if you won't, I'll come without consent. He spits. George swings his cobbled peg into the shallow swell, feels an icy rush electrify his spine, tighten his raw acorn. I'll not wash this impediment away, he thinks, but I shall baptize it. And further in he wades until his limits are lost below the soul. Further in he wades until he feels a buoyancy in his breeches, his foot, no longer an incumbency, a fouled and dragging anchor, but in the lifting water, in the biting tide, he finds a liberation and a thrill that hauls him close to ghosts. There, foul weather Jack, rounding the horn in a game, tumbling now with a mermaid and a whale, and George, waist deep, feels more than just a wetting of his keel, but a calling from the green and grieving sea, where the voices of his grandfather and of his great-grandfather rise from the dead water. Ahoy there, Georgie, the first voice calls. Find me 3 generations down. I went the way of the Bath Canal, never came out to my great shame, left you with little but a name. And the next in line comes up for air. George made it further out to sea, as far as the Ethan estuary. May we both provide a warning at this, the morning of your story, as you make your way into the Sound. Remember how your forefathers drowned. But our boy is casting off. Caution, sent beyond the folding crests. Yup, Georgie, his mother calls. Don't dare tear far eat, laddie. There are worlds beyond this limp island, this grey-green crag topped with moss, this salt rock wet with gossip, this dull mull wreathed in weed. There are further horizons George will find in fugitive pieces, in hours of idleness. This, a liquid art form he rehearses, where fluid movement rises from wild strokes and half afloat in fault and foam, kicking up a fuss in the abrupt current, shrieking in the rhyming tide. A boy wading into the breakers gives himself to the waves, finds suspension in the elements, is lifted off the page, then carried back to land, where blunt measure rules in meter, not in leagues. George will return to his dry school. Till then, let folly smile upon another coast, where we will watch the water for a mile, when this journey is further understood. And we go on, 1 foot bad, 1 foot good. My companion takes his breath, his vision spent, and England, consumed in mist, sinks beneath grey waves like a shy, retreating seal. Let us take pause, my companion says, to change the reels, to pick this story up once more, a decade done, when George is further out to sea at 21. He's come to test the waters once again, my companion says, and from this very spot, this promontory looking east, he will fish truth from myth or give a further fiction to it. From this vantage, you can see Troy, now weighed down in modern mud. And out there, on the other side, all the doors of Asia open wide. These, the same waters Virginia Woolf walked into, where Hart Crane went to take the cure, where Li Pao bowed his head to kiss the moon, where Paul Celan's last song dropped its anchor, pulled him under. They all came in behind you, George. They all swim in your weary wake, follow you down these ancient slopes. But before your clawfoot cracks the lens, freeze 100 dozen floating ghosts. Offer, if you will, your own story. Let us hear the poet speak, for I am weary, I am weak. These voices do not come from me. They pass through as water in the gorge. George, my companion calls, let your biographer take leave. Show yourself from heaven or from hell. Come once again to the Dardanelles. And that fog that was upon us cleared, to a rising sun behind, and from our shadows 2 men stepped, stripped and prepped for bathing. A poet and a sailor, shoulder to shoulder and indistinguishable from one another until the first one spoke. No other act of consummation has brought a gladder union than the hour I held tight upon this sound. No colder truth nor warmer cloak have I drawn as close, no embrace as fresh, nor touch as loose as those melting movements on the Kyle, no intimacy stung as true as that open marriage on the strait, and I was blessed. Yes, with good escort. All poets need a guide. He turned to the man attendant at his side. Hero held a lamp, and I went in. This is how all poetry begins. Those who choose to live by ink or salt may flounder in the well-oiled swell, lose their bid in the attempt, but there is honor in the endeavor. We rubbed each other down with butter and oil of olive, for the going would be cold, and winter still held its store beneath the surface. Spring was yet to show its kindness as I felt the firm curve of him, the timbers and taut rigging of a man tuned to the sea's low notes. He did not mock my soft hands, nor did I express pleasure to have a mariner grease my limbs. We were faithful to each other, devoted and of the same intent, for the poet and the sailor are one. Our course shared, our ports recorded on matching latitudes. We will see out the storms that taunt our boards and lick the hinges of our hatches. Our single mandate is to stay afloat. For who would go to the stars when by night they ride these waves, are swallowed by the hungry sea? We practice levitation on. Who would sink below when freedom glides across the glass? Poems sail on ancient winds. But the horizon brings new machines to steer our ships with quicker purpose toward new perils and old curses, things unseen at even depths the gods can scarcely fathom. We do not take the waters. The waters will take us. We surrender to the current. No, as in life, against the burn we fetch our paddles into. What small steerage can be claimed? What slight maneuver made with our frail and failing strokes? We can only throw ourselves into the stream, sink our oars into the oil, and roll. Rhyme against tide, breath against wind, endless sea, suspension without plot. Verse after verse, wave after wave, crest and trench, gutter and groove. I move and I am moved. With careful course and flamboyant gesture, I weave my lines into the water and swim with Asia on my shoulder. I swim with the West across my back. I swim with the green memory of glens, of gorges, of cuts and causeways. I swim with the weight of separation. I swim to defy the great divide. I swim in unity of the fluid rules. I swim against any fixed position. I swim with the darkness rising. I swim with a far light fading. I swim with uncertainty purring. I swim with the black dogs barking. I swim with the voices calling. I swim with the sirens singing. I swim with a cracked bell ringing. I swim with one foul foot kicking. I swim with despair, not in desperation. I swim with hopeful hands cupped open. I swim to pay back bad fortune. I swim to settle the debt with self. I swim for pleasure and for purchase. I swim not for gain, but for release. I swim for the prize, but not the title. I swim not for praise, but for reward. I swim toward fogged contradiction. I swim toward vague liberation. I swim toward blurred transition. I swim toward unclear permission. I swim toward mute revolution. I swim toward change and away. I swim against states and for nations. I swim to wash blood from this flag. I swim to heal the broken union. I swim to say that it is done. I swim because, no because. I swim beyond the bridle of love. I swim beyond the limits of poetry. I swim into the arms of Abydos. I swim to rinse myself in sin. I swim to end this venture and to begin. Then a silence as my companion looked first at me, then up toward the sun. He blinked, and in a second they were gone. The sap is rising this sly spring, my companion said. It's time to quit the garden for the field, leave the stream for the blowing ocean. It is time to let our poet go. Let him chase fragrant engagements, make trysts with antiquity, seek opportunist encounters, unfaithful liaisons. Let him mix seditious excursions with jokers and jack tars. Marrakech with wild Bill Burrows, Java with young Art Rambo tripping across desperate America on a bus named Further with Kesey and Cassidy. In San Francisco, George, dressed in leather, cruising on Castro, embracing the faith on Market Street, at the Naked Grape, at the Purple Pickle, roughing it at the Hustle Inn, hanging tough on Sanchez Street, watching the boys in the rear end bar, watching the boys, watching the girls, groping with poetry, mischievous mystic, pistolier and coxman, flirting with turpitude, acquainting himself with exotic new tongues, learning the curse words, talking dirty. Oh, George, you are a naughty boy, hobbling your way through bachelorhood. 1 foot bad and 1 foot good. 7 is a holy number of years to feel warm exile. And Italy, that clubbed foot stuck into an ancient sea, has held our poet well, has kept his pen wet, his nib dipped, his eccentricity fed. But its dusty relics do not require his defense. One can tire of nodding gondolas and squawking menageries. And it is with old ruin he will go again, immerse himself in the turning tide, make one last bid to reconcile these rival spurs we make our observation from, and wash loss out into the bay. It is a grey August day, recorded in oil, and the last scene from our movie, imagined now on the coast at Viareggio, where a fog is laid across a balmy Tuscan summer, where mourners cloak the beach before a poet's fire is lit. But the mist that hangs here is contrived, a grey veil drawn to add a sadness to the pose, the somber tone against the clear blue truth, the cloudless sky displayed on that occasion. But I will remain faithful to the art, not blunt the day with facts. I will blow smoke across the sea as our final act plays out. For this is the smoke rising from Shelley's pyre. This, the smoke Turner will turn orange with a wild twist of bristle. This, the smoke already lifting from the embers of Byron's memoir, lit up in London, and the steam of fever on his hot brow in Greece. This is the smoke that poetry makes, a brief and playful vapor in imitation of the heavens, a quick syrup misting the horizon, flat stratus, bloated cumulus, with a belly full of thunder, 100 suns on. This is the smoke from the guns at Gallipoli, the boom and crack of cannon calling. This is the smoke of war, George, clouding your proficiency, dulling your vibrancy, muting your tune. The smoke that sees heroes' light go dim and lovers lose their way in conspiring tides and irate waves, where your brave lines fold into the foam. Did you ever dream of swimming home to to bonny lochs and cool Harrow pools, to Nottinghamshire rivers, the sore and smite, the lean and idle. Did you miss the scent of scandal coming undone in buttoned up London, your loose undoings by Venetian lagoons, those ghostly moons on Wraithish lakes? This is the smoke that poetry makes, a haze that leaves a film of truth and blurs your earthly enterprise, sets spirits loose upon this coast. Your business is not with straight course, a clear run toward the sea, but sideways, veers, and crabs the stones as you go down to meet the melting edge and step from this dry predicament into a fluid congregation with the waves. Leave poor Shelley to the flames. All good poets burn, even the damp ones smoulder. Your appointment with the water, neither cure nor panacea, but a nursing treatment for this fire. My companion and I look on, watch Byron turn from this fabled frame, animate this mournful tableau, trade Italy for ancient Greece, swap quill for sword, swap ink for blood, and with that far lamp now dimming, he goes swimming. Rhyme against tide, breath against wind, endless sea, suspension without plot, swimming with the folding cold, swimming with the slow weed snarling, swimming with the salt flow rising, swimming with the tears stinging, swimming to embrace a vagueness waiting, swimming to consummate a phantom marriage, swimming to cool his throbbing storner, swimming to and from his mother, swimming to forget his dead daughter, swimming away from brilliant Ada, swimming away from obligation, swimming away from flawed tradition, swimming for the little death it is, swimming toward the source of myth, swimming beyond bondage and constraint, swimming from lame gods and clumsy money, swimming from virtuous poetry like unsweet honey, swimming from limping fame and elegant failure, swimming from the gossip of Florence, swimming from the quarrels of Venice, swimming until his breath is spent, swimming one more length and then the next, swimming from a past that is yet to come, swimming from a future already undone, swimming away from the same old story, swimming back to what happened before, swimming from love, swimming to war. And we will follow you into the spume, go with you into the water, and some will flounder, and some will drown. Some of us will make it out, learn to crawl ashore, stand tall, limp on, half mad, 1 foot good, 1 foot bad. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much indeed, Jan. That was wonderful. It's quite a tour de force. Really brilliant. Thanks, and thanks again to the other Byron for the sponsorship, John and David. Thank you very much for that. There's a reason why Wednesday's lecture is on Tuesday, which I'm just going to mention. Because next Wednesday we have our big gala fundraising event at Palazzo Lanfredini, the visit to the museum, Ferragamo Museum, there's an aperitivo, and there's a beautiful dinner, and there's all sorts of nice things happening. It was all sold out, but just today, 2 people dropped out. So if anyone is burning to come for a very glamorous night at Ferragamo HQ on the Piano Nobile of Palazzo Lanfredini, not open to the public normally, talk to me afterwards, we can fix you up. And I think that's probably enough. We can go through and get some wine. This season's partners are Rufino, and it's nice wine. So thank you very much.